evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It is June 18th, 2023. I'm your host, Dave Pike. We're here to talk about the Alberta politics situation, as well as a couple other things. And then we're going to round it out by opening up the microphone to our Twitter Spaces audience. So if you're somebody on Twitter Spaces who has some thoughts about what we're talking about here tonight, or perhaps wants to tell us why we're wrong, then right after we're done the main program, then you can absolutely tap in and share your thoughts, because we're about conversation here. But getting right into the things and the stuff, a lot going on this week. Even as we were putting the show together today, they're like, oh yeah, and that, oh yeah, and that, oh yeah, and that. So we got a lot that we're going to try to cover. But we're going to start right off the gates with something that came out a little bit earlier this week. This was a tweet from Catherine Grukowski, who is a journalist covering Alberta politics here in the province of Alberta. She does an absolutely amazing job, and she has the ability to find stuff and pursue stuff that you don't see a lot of other organizations following. She gets a couple of shout outs on this episode because she absolutely crushed it this week. But one of the places that she crushed it the most, or started crushing it anyways, had to do with the wildfires. We've seen a lot of conspiracy theories. We've seen a lot of speculation as to the wildfires and what are the causes, and almost everybody who has any understanding or expertise in the field of wildfires has been saying to anybody who will listen, it's really, really dry out there right now, folks. You sneeze in the wrong direction, you can start a wildfire. A moose sneezes in the wrong direction. Okay, not actually a moose, but you get what I'm saying. She put an inquiry in to see how many of the 641 or 647, depending on how you choose to count them, wildfires are being investigated for arson. And she got an answer. Wildfire investigators from Alberta Forestry, Parks and Tourism assess and investigate the origin and cause of wildfires within Alberta. As a fire is determined to be a human cause and or suspicious, the RCMP Forestry Crimes Unit is contacted and will jointly assist their partners with the investigation. While the vast majority of these fires have been attributed to natural occurring sources such as lightning, the RCMP Forestry Crimes Unit is currently investigating 12 suspicious wildfires from January 1st, 2023 to June 12th, 2023, where human activity is believed to be a factor. In 2022, 21 suspicious wildfires were investigated. A total of 40 were investigated in 2021. 12. The Premier of Alberta went on Ryan Jasperson like a week and a half ago and did a whole thing about, you're hearing the stories about arson. I checked my notifications on my locals page and people were saying, the arson. Well, it turns out there's 12, maybe. This is another conspiracy theory that Daniel Smith has chosen to amplify to try to make people more upset, to try to make people more angry, and to try to make people feel like they're being victimized. Which, as you see throughout the show tonight, is going to be a little bit of a theme because there's a whole lot of that going around. But we got a little bit of housekeeping we got to do first. So, first of all, one of the other big pieces of news that came out is a judge upheld a fine that was handed out in connection with the alleged kamikaze UCP leadership campaign. To go back, and we'll actually read right from the article here because that's probably the easiest way to sum it up nice and quickly. The written decision released Wednesday, Calgary Court of King's Bench Justice Michael Marion rejected Jeffrey Park's appeal of the punishment by the Office of the Election Commission. Park was found to have made donations of $3,500 in his name and his wife's name to the 2017 UCP leadership campaign of Jeff Callaway. Callaway was alleged to have entered the campaign to undermine former Wild Rose leader, party leader Brian Jean's battle against eventual winner Jason Kenney. Callaway dropped out of the race and endorsed Kenney, who went on to become premier. Both sides denied any collusion, despite the fact, and I'll just interject here, that there's very good and strong evidence that there was in fact conversations that occurred between the Callaway campaign and the Kenney campaign. There was an open admission that maybe they coordinated some things. So there's that. Marion ruled the penalty handed to Park didn't amount to a true penal consequence or was similar to a criminal prosecution. As a result, he could not argue his charter rights in proceedings in criminal and penal matters were violated. The judge also dismissed suggestions election commissioner investigator Dave Jennings and the commissioner himself had closed minds and prejudged the case. So, there's another example of how somebody was trying to basically usurp the democratic norms that kind of drive how our system and how our society is supposed to work. And when they got caught, they were like, no, I want to get away with it. And fortunately, the system said, no, you don't get to get away with it, because there is extensive reporting on the subject of whether or not the Kenney campaign put forward the Callaway campaign in order to effectively destroy Brian Jean and then move all of the support over to Jason Kenney. It's been widely reported on. There have been comments from people in the Kenney administration that are like, no, that that's totally normal. That's just how we do things, guys. But there's no doubt, and certainly as we're seeing in this court ruling here, there's no doubt that there were a lot of financial irregularities that went on with the Callaway campaign. And this is being upheld by the justice system. So that's the first thing that we got to talk about in regards to a little bit of housekeeping. The next thing that we got to talk about in regards to a little bit of housekeeping is this week we saw the Shantrums proceedings, we'll call them. Tyler Shandro, who had some Law Society hearings a little while ago and had those Law Society hearings put off because they went longer than expected because of the amount of drama that was involved in them. He had his remainder almost of his hearings this week. But where it gets, it's like the song that never ends. It just goes on and on, my friends. It was decided that the final arguments would not be presented. They would instead be written. So the hearing that was supposed to end on Thursday instead has now been delayed to September 5th. Now, what's interesting about this is this coincides with the announcement that there were going to be judicial recounts in Tyler Shandro's constituency. We've talked a little bit about the fact that because the election was so close in two particular constituencies, we're talking about Tyler Shandro's constituency and we're talking about Whitney Issach's constituency. Because the number of votes that determined the winner on election night was less than 100, Elections Alberta did a recount. Now, that recount included all of the votes cast that day. There is, of course, the option of the UCP and Tyler Shandro and Whitney Issach saying, hey, you know what? We'd actually like to have a judicial recount. Now, a judicial recount is where all of the votes that were cast are recounted under the supervision of a judge. That had to be done. That had to be requested within 8 days of the final results being posted. The final results were posted on June 8th. We found out on Friday through reporter Safe Kaiser that, they're doing that. Whitney Issach and Tyler Shandro have both requested a judicial recount. Those will take a little bit of time. So it's interesting. There's some people who have speculated maybe the fact that this was kicked to September 5th has to do with the judicial recount. It doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense. We're not lawyers here, so we can't say with any sort of certainty. But it's certainly an interesting little twist, and it gives Shandro to have maybe yet another best summer ever. Moving on from there, one of the other stories that came out this week was that Irfan Sabir had announced that he was filing a complaint and that he was requesting the new Justice Minister, Mickey Amory, appoint an independent investigator to take a look at the allegations that were largely confirmed by the Ethics Commissioner's report that Danielle Smith had interfered with the administration of justice. It's quite a lengthy little letter, and it makes a few things quite clear, makes a few concerns quite clear, but it seems to be specifically that prior to becoming premier, I'll read the three major concerns. Prior to becoming premier, Danielle Smith spoke at length on a radio show about the report of the Federal Ethics Commissioner into interference by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau with respect to SNC-Lavalin case, which demonstrated that she understood what a conflict of interest was. A briefing was prepared for the Premier on the role of the Attorney General and what the government was allowed to do with respect to prosecutions. The Ministry of Justice created a PowerPoint presentation for the Premier that outlined the role of the Attorney General and stated that the Attorney General should not be involved in individual prosecutions. Now, this makes the argument quite clearly that Danielle Smith knew what she was doing when she took the call from Artur Pawlowski and when she followed up that call with a call to Tyler Shandro, where she talked about how badly she just wanted the whole thing to go away. Now, of course, the reality of this is that this is a request that has been sent by the NDP to the new UCP Justice Minister, who they've already said, we got no further comment on this. They're going to wait to see what recommendations the Ethics Commissioner puts through from here, because she did reserve the right, if you will, to put forward further recommendations for any sort of sanctions that should be levied against Premier Smith. So the odds of the brand new Justice Minister saying, hey, you know what, NDP, you're right, we're going to run with this, we're going to see what happens, is the odds aren't so great. But staying with some NDP stuff for a sec, we saw a press conference earlier this week where the leader of the opposition, Rachel Notley, stepped forward, and she had some broad thoughts that she wanted to share and some questions that she wanted to kind of, sort of, but maybe not really answer. One of those questions had to do with whether or not she would remain as leader for the NDP.
Do you see yourself staying on as leader until the next election?
So lovely question, and my answer is this. Like all leaders in our system of government, I think it's good leadership to consider your role leading up to an election and to consider your role after an election. I did that in 2015, did it in 2019, did it leading into 2023, and of course I'm doing it now. And when I've concluded that consideration, I will let people know.
So she's thinking about things, is the Coles Notes. Now, there is a lot of conversation that's going on as to what the future of the NDP will look like. There's a lot of people who are saying, you know what, Rachel took it as far as she could. There's no question, though, that the NDP has enjoyed, I feel like massive is not an understatement, growth under Rachel Notley. As many people have noted, she is the leader of the largest opposition in Alberta's history. She basically ran the bases on Edmonton, made significant inroads in Calgary. But there's a lot of people who are saying, hey, you know what? She's been doing this job for a while. Maybe it's time for change, which presents all kinds of problems because the NDP has very much been branded as the Rachel Notley party. So what does the NDP look like going forward? How does the NDP move forward? How do they make ground in the next election? And this is a big conversation, because one thing that conservatives have unquestionably figured out is, hey, if you want to change the channel on the bad track record or the contentious track record of a previous leader, one really good way to do that is to change the leader. That's how the UCP changed the channel on Jason Kenney. They brought in a new leader, Danielle Smith. There's already rumors going around that Danielle Smith is in the targets and the crosshairs of being replaced. So it's entirely possible that we'll see another UCP leader in the not too distant future. So that's the question that faces the NDP. But one of the other questions that faces the NDP has to do with one of the big criticisms that was levied against the NDP during the provincial election. And that's the fact that the provincial NDP is tied to the federal NDP. They do share organizational, let's go with bridges. And there's a lot of people who have said that because of that, there's some people who don't view Rachel Notley as being a truly independent leader for Alberta, because a lot of the things that are going on in Alberta kind of contradict some of the goals that the federal NDP have asked about. And the question came up at this press conference, would the provincial NDP consider separating? Now, Notley was pretty direct with her answer, but where she took it was particularly fascinating.
Election, the UCP was definitely hammering on the point that you're constitutionally connected to the federal NDP, trying to link the and Notley Singh alliance. As you do the debrief in the coming months, what, if any, consideration are you giving to the possibility of defederating, breaking off the provincial NDP from the federal NDP?
That is not even remotely in my on my list of issues to consider. But let me just say this. I think that particular critique was one that was designed by folks who really struggled to find things to criticize about Alberta's NDP.
Which is a fascinating take. The notion that people were at a loss of things to criticize when it came to the provincial NDP, whether or not we're talking about them kicking out one of their First Nations Indigenous candidates very, very early on in the race, whether or not we're talking about the scandals that exist within the NDP and their internal culture, whether or not we're talking about the allegations of harassment, whether or not we're talking about the increase to the corporate tax rate that they rolled out during the election that more than a few pundits have said probably cost them more than a few votes and maybe even the entire election. There's no shortage of things for who wants to take the time that are valid to criticize the NDP on. And it's quite telling of where maybe Rachel Notley's head is in the game when her response to that question is, it's literally the only thing they could come up with to criticize us for, guys. What are you going to do? Even during the NDP's tenure as government from 2015 to 2019, there were no shortage of mistakes and in some cases scandals, both in the legislative realm as well as in the, let's go with personal realm, that occurred. There's any party that has been in any position of power or even adjacent to power for any length of time has things that they can be criticized for. But the fact that Rachel Notley's position is we're so perfect, that's all they could come up with, really doesn't seem to set the right tone for, and here's how we're going to get better. Here's how we're going to earn the votes that we need in the run up to the next provincial election 4 years from now. But as we've already seen, the election campaign pretty much started the day after the election campaign for 2025, pretty much started the day after the votes were all cast. It's going to be interesting to see how the NDP move forward, and we'll certainly be staying on top of it. But we got to get to the Smith show because we had us a week here with our premier folks. Started off with this tweet. Fun fact, a little factoid from the premier of Alberta. My husband and I own a restaurant. This weekend, the dishwasher broke down, so I went in for a shift. Now, there's a lot to unpack in this tweet and this picture, and we're going to try to unpack some of it. There are a lot of people who responded to the tweet and the photo by saying, hey, if you take a look at this picture, there's a lot going on here. There's some very clear hazards. It doesn't appear that the dishes are being washed in such a way that would be compliant with how dishes in restaurants are supposed to be washed. There's that floor's not looking super great. And how come for somebody who's washing dishes, Danielle Smith isn't at all dishwashy-y? But it also raised some much bigger questions and concerns. As some people pointed out the shoes, we did, because you're not supposed to have open-toed shoes in a kitchen. Anybody who's ever worked in a kitchen will tell you that. But there's some bigger questions. And the biggest question has to be, MLAs and ministers are supposed to have all of their assets in what's called a blind trust. And what that means is they're supposed to have zero contact, zero access, and zero participation in any financial interest. This is one of the things that got Tyler Shandro in so much trouble, because when the whole scandal came up that he was making cuts to the healthcare system, he was going after physicians, it also was revealed that he had previously been a director in and his wife was currently an owner in a private health insurance company. Now, where Tyler Shandro got into real trouble with it was he forwarded emails that that his wife had received from the company address to other people. So he was very clearly acting with an interest in that company, some people say. Well, here we have Danielle Smith, who is the Premier of Alberta. She is a minister. She makes mad bank for doing so. And very clearly, the restaurant that her husband and I still own. So it's not, you can't say, her husband owns the restaurant, because she says she owns it in the tweet. So there's no question that she has a financial interest in the success of the restaurant. There's no question that she has a financial interest in the daily goings on of the restaurant. And yet here she is participating in the success of that restaurant. Now, this turned into what some people interpreted as a really bizarre public interest story. We saw the National Post did a whole story. Danielle Smith, her amazing restaurant. Hey, she did a tweet about it, everybody. We should make this national news. Now, what's interesting about the article is that it's credited to National Post staff. The author isn't identified, which is kind of not how usual news articles go. It's also worth noting this isn't the first time that Danielle Smith has posted about her restaurant since being in office. She did a little tweet right after the election where she said, "I'm so thankful for all the messages of support and congratulations in the past few days. Some personal time yesterday with my husband to refresh and recharge was just that I needed," and included pictures of her working in the herb garden that's behind the restaurant. But you had to know, because it's Danielle Smith. There's always another bit to the story. And it didn't take very long before people noticed that that restaurant is actually up for sale. $365,000, $350 one, $351 a month. You could be the owner of this wonderful, unique restaurant opportunity. Multiple listings were found and identified. We got a heads up on it pretty early as well, where it became very, very clear. It's a new listing, just happened in the last couple of days. Some people are identifying it as being 2 days after Danielle Smith did her tweet. And there's a lot of people who said, whoa, that is super offside. And they said, whoa, that's super offside, because here you have the Premier of Alberta talking about how she owns this restaurant. You then have a national news magazine picking up a story and saying, hey, did you know Danielle Smith owns a restaurant? It's quite delightful. They have food. Also a bunch of health code violations over the last few years, but let's not talk about that. And then Danielle Smith's restaurant goes up for sale. Now, this turns into a problem in a lot of different ways, because first of all, by her pumping up the fact that she owns the restaurant, she's elevating the perception and the visuality of the restaurant, visibility of the restaurant. By the National Post doing that story, they're elevating the visibility of the restaurant. And then Danielle Smith turns around and decides they're going to sell the restaurant. Now, not only is there an argument to be made, all of that coverage likely helped the selling, but there's also an argument to be made. Okay, so the Premier of Alberta has identified that she owns this restaurant. It's now up for sale, and anybody who has $365,000 can buy it from her and maybe be her new bestie. A lot of people have raised the concern that there is the potential for people to get not just an audience with Danielle Smith via a showing, but also ingratiate themselves. A lot of people have raised the concerns, hey, maybe the same people who are pushing for programs like Our Star, maybe the same people who are pushing for other private interest programs, $365,000 ain't that much money to somebody who's sitting on millions. Maybe they buy the restaurant. Maybe they score themselves some points. It presents a whole big ethical challenge. The bottom line is Danielle Smith should have never put anything about the fact that she owned this restaurant on any of her official, we'll get to that more in later, social media. It shouldn't have happened. But Danielle Smith had a rough week with social media. because midweek she announced she was having some problems, allegedly. So she put up this tweet on the 14th, where she said, big tech and government censorship is becoming a danger to free speech around the world. My Facebook account has been banned from posting content for a few days. As the premier of a province of 4.6 million Albertans, if they can prevent me from communicating with you, imagine that what they can do to any one of us. Regardless of our political leanings, we must all stand against censorship. And then she CC'd Elon Musk, because she posted it to Twitter, I guess, and she CC'd Mark Zuckerberg, who hasn't posted on Twitter in an extraordinarily long time. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, because that started off a chain of events. We saw organizations like Canada Proud say, hey, sign up here if you're worried about censorship. When Elon Musk, a Canadian citizen, labeled CBC as being a government-funded, which it is, the Trudeau Liberals cried for an interference. Yet when Facebook, an American company, bans Danielle Smith from their platform, the Trudeau Liberals say nothing. We saw Danielle Smith's right-hand man, Rob Anderson, come out swinging. Facebook has decided to censor the premier for who knows what. And I mean, that's a valid argument. Smith does say a lot of crazy stuff. There is a lot of reasons why she might be banned from social media platforms, potentially. Big tech censorship is spinning out of control. Now, it's important to remember, Rob Anderson is the executive director for the office of the premier. One would think, if anybody knew what was going on with the premier's social media account being banned, Rob Anderson, he'd be at the front of that line. He'd know what's going on. But apparently, that's not what happened, because a very short time period later, in fact, the next day, and again, Catherine Krakowski knocking it out of the park. Catherine Krakowski posted this tweet. Meta, which is the parent company for Facebook, got back to me. A spokesperson said, the premier's Facebook page wasn't restricted, but one of the administrators faces restrictions. And then she included the statement. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for your patience. Sharing a statement below attributable to a Meta spokesperson. Comment. There were no restrictions placed on the premier's page. One of the page's administrators faced restrictions, but that did not impact the underlying page's ability to post content. Another journalist, Jen Gerson. I also reached out to Facebook and they told me the same thing. There are no content restrictions on AB Danielle Smith's page. One of several admins on the page was temporarily restricted because he was also an admin on 300 other pages and probably tripped a spam filter. So to be clear, Danielle Smith never lost the ability to post on her Facebook page. It's a page. It's not a personal account. And other journalists were able to determine there are actually 5 people who have the ability, admin access or moderator access to her Facebook page. So even though there's this one person who allegedly has 300 other Facebook pages that they're very busy running, there were still 4 other people who could have posted to that account. Presumably, Danielle Smith is one of the 5, which means either she's the person who's running 300 Facebook accounts, or she didn't bother to check herself before all of the hair was lit on fire about her Facebook account being blocked and her not being able to communicate with Albertans. Never mind the obvious hypocrisy of Danielle Smith saying, hey, you know what? I need to be able to communicate with as many Albertans as possible, when her Twitter page has banned a stunning amount of Albertans. So much so that that's one of the regular questions that she gets asked. Hey, you've banned all of these people. You've blocked all of these people. When are you going to let them back in? Now, initially, her response was, well, when people use foul language, if they're name calling, if they're using the F-bomb or they're calling me the C word, then I have a right to block them. And she's absolutely right. When somebody is coming to the table and they're not trying to get any answers, they're just there to post vile stuff. Absolutely. That's abuse. But there's a difference between abuse and disagreement. And we know from our end, we've never used any profanity directed at the Premier of Alberta. We've certainly never used the C word directed at the Premier of Alberta. Our sin that got us blocked was when we asked her about the GoFundMe for the lawsuit that never happened. And then she apparently donated $90,000 for a tax receipt, possibly, to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. The lawsuit never happened. Somebody made a lot of money. We just asked, hey, what happened with all that money, Danny? We were blocked minutes within asking that question. So as much as Danielle Smith likes to say, you know, the only people who get blocked off of my Twitter account are people who say really, really horrible things, that's simply not true. But of course, Danielle Smith couldn't just take the, hey, you know what? Yeah, there were 4 other people who could have posted. We kind of jumped the gun on that one. Instead, she decided to post this. Happy to report my page is able to post on Facebook again. This was the error that appeared on my page. I hope this is the last time it happens. And then she has a screenshot of, sorry, you can't post to Facebook from this account for security reasons. You have limited access to the site for a few days. If you have any questions, please contact our help center. So clearly, whoever the user was who operates allegedly 300 Facebook pages, who triggered off the security warning, which is probably actually a good thing because it's the Premier of Alberta's account. You'd probably want to have some security going on with that there. But she presents it as if, see, look, guys, there was an error. Somebody was blocked out. Doesn't address the fact that there's multiple people who have access to that account. The perpetual victimhood. And continuing on with the perpetual victimhood, Danielle Smith came out strong this week in regards to the Sustainable Jobs Act. Now, the Sustainable Jobs Act was previously referred to as, and poorly branded as, the Just Transition. Danielle Smith has gotten a lot of ground out of the Just Transition because while the act is designed to come up with a plan to address the fact that there are a lot of jobs in oil and gas that aren't going to be around for very much longer, and we don't want those people who work those jobs right now to be totally screwed when that happens, we should probably come up with a plan for that. Danielle Smith has instead decided to position it as Justin Trudeau wants to shut down our oil and gas industry. Simply not the case. But there's a lot of furor over it. Danielle Smith got a lot of mileage out of it, and the framework of the act was introduced into Parliament. Danielle Smith came out with this response. We'll read the little phrase here. Alberta will not recognize, cooperate, or enforce any attempt to phase out our province's oil and gas industry or its workforce. This is non-negotiable. And then she released a very long statement where she talked about all of the concerns that she had. But she admits that the primary purpose of the proposed Sustainable Jobs Act is to form an advisory council that will provide the federal government with recommendations on how to support the Canadian workforce during transition to a net zero economy. Now, there's no question, there's no doubt that there is still going to be companies who, especially given the rate of return that they get right now, they're going to want to pull some oil and gas out of the ground in Alberta. But what Danielle Smith seems to be unwilling to recognize is the increasing role that automation plays. We've seen oil and gas companies brag about the fact they got robot trucks. They got trucks that do all the driving in the oil sands. Don't even need drivers anymore. Safer for everybody. But there's a loss of jobs that comes with that. And as more and more of what were historically blue-collar jobs get more and more automated, there's going to be fewer of those jobs available. We're certainly seeing that there are fewer and fewer major projects that are being initiated. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that infrastructure for those projects already exists. So the days of having people who have welding trucks who are driving around the province, building pipelines and all of that sort of thing, those days are done, period. And we've certainly seen major projects canceled in Alberta, not because so much of the regulatory environment, but because investors are demanding that companies have net zero projects. International investors are demanding we can't just keep dumping carbon into the atmosphere because things keep burning, and that's not great. So there's that little bit on the Sustainable Jobs Act, which brings us to what is, again, probably going to be a deeply emotional, deeply polarizing part of the show. We are roughly halfway through Pride Week, and people are still losing their minds because of, Pride Month, because Pride is apparently really bad somehow, even though it's rights that are recognized under the Charter and a celebration of the progress that has been made by the country and a recognition that there's still lots of work to be done. We did this on last week's episode, so we're not going to try to rehash it, but there's been some developments that we got to talk about. Benita Peterson. Benita Peterson is a organizer for Take Back Alberta. She's also heavily involved in the Freedom Convoy. She was also heavily involved in protests, the freedom protests that occurred around Canada, particularly in Alberta, in regards to health protections, in regards to mask mandates. She's also the person who stood outside of an Alberta hospital and straight up called nurses liars as they were either on their break or getting off shift, presenting herself as a reporter. She had a tripod and everything for her iPhone. It was very, very serious looking. But she straight up harassed and called these nurses who are working in COVID wards at the time, said that they were lying, said that they weren't actually doing these things. She's a bit of a gem, Benita is. Well, Benita decided Pride's in her crosshairs this month. She wanted to cancel the Rainbow Crosswalk that was being proposed in Westlock, Alberta. She's building a whole campaign to stop the evils of the Rainbow Crosswalk. Well, despite her protestations, the town of Westlock issued a statement after they decided, yeah, you know what, we're going to go ahead with it. And it's a pretty powerful statement. We recognize that there is division within our community regarding the Rainbow Crosswalk. That difference in beliefs has been inflamed by a few who have been spreading hateful messages intending to widen the space between us all. Their actions have caused division and heightened fears among people. It is disheartening to witness how some individuals can be intolerant and uninformed towards others who are simply trying to live their lives in peace. We implore you all to take the time to consider that this Rainbow Crosswalk request came from a group of our youth. Their goals and hopes for this Rainbow Crosswalk are acceptance and inclusion. On the day of painting, whatever belief you hold close, we ask that you are mindful that these are our children. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect and kindness. The Rainbow Crosswalk is a start towards creating a more inclusive and accepting society where everyone feels safe and loved. And it's true. Because when we're talking about LGBTQ2S+, people in general, but particularly when we're talking about LGBTQ2S+ youth, their experiences are very different than people who aren't LGBTQ2S+. We just did an interview where we had former city councilor Jeremy Farkas on the show. And Jeremy talked about the fact that when he came out to his friends, not only was he the victim of bullying, but he was the victim of sexual assault. This is the reality for LGBTQ2S+ youth. And to put up a crosswalk that says, hey, you know what? We see you. We've got your backs. We're trying to make things better. to normalize the idea isn't a bad thing because it prevents real harm. But unfortunately, there's some people who just don't get it. We saw Pride for Fort McMurray, or Pride YMM, issue a statement following a series of social media posts by a Fort McMurray Catholic School District Board of Trustee named Jonathan Higdon, where he made some comments about how he's going to teach his children, and it's time to be less tolerant of today's worldly ideologies. And Pride YYM included some statistics that are important to realize. 44% of LGBTQ2S plus youth have reported having thoughts about suicide. 50% reported self-harming. 53% felt unsafe at school, compared with 3% of heterosexual youth. 64% heard homophobic comments daily or weekly at school. 30% had been the victims of cyberbullying, compared to 8% of cisgender heterosexual youth. 57% of trans youth had been the targets of rumors or lies. Here's a couple of the posts. Jonathan Higdon. Every child was made perfect, perfectly designed in the womb, from head to toe by God. It's an abomination to think that a God made you a male when you were supposed to be a female, and vice versa. God doesn't make mistakes. Every child is conceived with a purpose in this life that comes from God. He knew long before they ever were a thought that they can be world changers. It's time to be less tolerant of today's worldly ideologies. Doesn't mean I'm homophobic. Doesn't mean I don't respect people that think differently. But just as much as your opinion is important to you, my views and opinion are just as important to me. And neither of our opinions is less important than the others. And then it's got a graphic of, I will teach my child so there is no confusion, with two people holding up an umbrella to stop the rainbow, with male dad, female mom, girl boy. So just because I'm throwing up a graphic that's saying that the rainbow flag is something that kids need to be protected from doesn't mean I'm homophobic. Which is to completely ignore the fact that not all kids are made perfect. Ask any NICU nurse or NICU physician. There are interventions that have to be done with a lot of kids because they aren't born perfect. It's nobody's fault. But sometimes things just happen. And to make the statement that all kids are born perfect regardless, not only implies that somehow those kids who are born with those heart conditions or those other congenital defects, that's somehow God's plan, it's all good, is really, really insensitive. But more to the point, it implies quite clearly that if a kid is LGBTQS+, that's something wrong. There's something wrong with them for being that way, and God doesn't make mistakes. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with being LGBTQ2S+. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And anybody who says there is, 9 times out of 10, is trying to mask and deal with their own bullshit and insecurities. And it would be great if we could say, but those are the only examples. But they're not. We also saw this event being amplified by the leader of Take Back Alberta. So just to keep the scoreboard clear, we've got Benita Peterson, who's one of the main organizers for Take Back Alberta, the organization that claims credit for not only getting rid of Jason Kenney, not only making Danielle Smith the new leader of the UCP, but they also took credit for her win and her forming government. Well, here they are posting about an event that was held in Calgary on Friday and saying, please consider going to this event. Parents' voices matter. Say no to forced LGBTQ indoctrination in public schools. Oh, look, it's the same graphic from the school board trustee. It's the exact same graphic. Now, the difference is this event was billed as being organized by members of the Muslim community here in Calgary. And I want to be really clear right off the gates, in case we weren't clear enough last week, and in case I wasn't clear enough last week, you cannot talk about any religion, any culture, any demographic group like it's a monolith. 20% of any given population is going to be assholes. That's just the way that people work. But let's talk about a little bit about who this protest is or was ostensibly organized by, who took credit for it, and what their relationship is to people in the corridors of power. Because one of the things that we've seen is there have been calls for people in positions of leadership to condemn things. It's considered, we have Danielle Smith saying, Facebook's the worst. They banned me even though they didn't. The Justin Trudeau, just transition. It's the worst, even though it's just trying to make sure that people have jobs when the inevitable happens. You have Danielle Smith saying, the arson, even though there's 12 that are being investigated for arson. So the virtue signaling from the right is really, really quite important. One would think that if anybody had ties to a protest that was going after LGBTQ2S plus youth, you would expect any leaders who were affiliated with that to maybe address that. So who would this individual be affiliated with? Well, the person we're talking about is named Mahmoud Moura. And he's got some friends in high places. This is a picture from just recently with Danielle Smith, Mickey Amory, and Mr. Moura. But, you could go, you pose for some pictures. You do what you do. Maybe it's not necessarily quite so much. Politicians like to pose for pictures. It's not like he has a long-lasting history with the UCP. It's not like he's campaigned for Mickey Amory, I don't know, in 2019 whilst posing with Jason Kenney or anything like that. It's not like he's posed with the current UCP MLA and minister for Calgary North. It's not like he posed with Brian Jean. Oh, wait, it's exactly like he's done all of those things because he has. Mr. Moura is deeply ingrained in the DNA of the UCP, and particularly, it appears, works very, very closely with Mickey Amory and his campaign. Got the shirts and everything. But, some people have political views. It's not like he's espoused anything particularly hateful or leaned into conspiracies in the past. Oh, wait. Yes, he has. We pulled these two images off his Facebook today. The first one, a graphic of hands covering up the mouth of a person. One of them is Facebook, one of them is Instagram, and one of them is, of course, the Star of David. The difference is Facebook and Instagram are just covering the mouth of the person in this picture, whereas the hand that is represented by the Star of David, it's choking the person. We also pulled the second image off of his Facebook as well. People who believe two planes caused these to collapse, and then shows a picture of the World Trade Center, now look like this, and it's a kid wearing a mask. This is the organizer of this campaign. This is the person who claims to be the organizer of this campaign. Now, you might be thinking, well, there's this TBA thing, and yeah, Benita Peterson's doing some stuff, and yeah, David Parker, he kind of amplified it. Maybe he's just encouraging people to get involved in democracy. It's not like he was directly involved in the protest and did a speech or anything. Oh, wait.
Anti-human, and it must be stopped. The truth of the matter is that anyone who teaches you that you are a disease on this planet, anyone who teaches you that children should be castrated and made infertile, they are anti-human. And they must be stopped. And how are we going to stop them, you ask? Well, the answer is simple. Right now, you are taking the first step. Never forget that the world is not run by the people who by all the people. It is run by the people who show up. And for too long, we have not been the people who have shown up. For too long, we have hidden. For too long, we have said, we cannot make a difference. They are just going to do this. That is not true. There is more of us than there is of them. And so I say this to all of you. Who here feels that horrible things are happening in our libraries? Raise your hand. And how many of you here today sit on library boards? There we go, we've got one. Thank you, sir. The answer right now is that we have to get engaged. Every one of you has to begin participating in their democracy. If you want them to leave your kids alone, you have to be the ones making the decision about how that happens. And I tell you that Take Back Alberta is about one thing. It is not about your religion. It is not about your creed. It is not about your skin color. It is about this. It is about you taking back your democracy from your own apathy. That is what this country is founded on. That is what you must do, because they will not leave your kids alone. They will not leave your children alone unless you get engaged. Unless you become the people that is changing things. So I say this to end. I don't want to speak too long, but I will say this. Leave our kids alone.
Leave our kids alone. It's about the kids. We don't want our kids being exposed to any sort of ideological, political leanings that we don't think are appropriate. We don't want to see that stuff happening in libraries. We don't want to see that stuff happening on the internet. It shouldn't be happening at all. We got to protect the kids. That's what it's all about. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out the fact that Canada was not founded on taking back democracy from apathy. Canada was founded by, hey, it looks like there's some really nice stuff out there. We should go and get it. That's what a lot of Canada continues to be about. But if you want to talk about respecting governmental decisions, one should probably take a little bit of time to read the Indian Act and recognize just how much we steamrolled a bunch of people who had a bunch of established governance structures because we wanted to. Mr. Parker, I would love to know what his fascination is with the black turtlenecks, because that man is committed to bringing that trend back. And as much as we're seeing a lot of fashion trends come back from the 80s and the 90s, I'm not sure he's going to get there. But if we really want to take a look at the righteousness of all of these people who just want to protect the kids, maybe we should take a look at some of the other things that they amplify. Maybe we should take a look at something that Premier Smith chose to amplify this week, because the piece du jour this week was all about Aaron Gunn's documentary. I'm probably required to say that so I don't get sued. There's been a lot of criticism of this particular, let's go with theatrical work, because there is no question that it has very, very strong political leanings. There's no question that it has very, very biased and not necessarily founded in science leanings. The image that you're seeing right here on the screen, if you're watching this, and if you're not, I'll describe it for you, because that's the kind of service that you get with the breakdown, is a still frame from the very opening minutes of the film, where a person is hit in the head with an incendiary device. It's pretty stark stuff. It's all about how addictions, homelessness, it's destroying the country. We have to fight back. We have to get people in the treatment, abstinence-based. It's the only way to go. Never mind all the science that says that's not true. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach. This is complicated. It's nuanced. You're talking about a variety of different types of trauma. Never mind all of that. We're just going to go with the hard line. And it's important to realize that this documentary, body of work, film, propaganda piece, I mean, I don't know, that this piece has had a bit of a bumpy go. It was originally published to YouTube. We'll take a look at what Mr. Gunn said about the documentary and his YouTube experience, because that's one of the things that got it a lot of traction in conservative circles over the last week. What is happening to Canada? Skyrocketing crime, violent attacks, drug-fueled chaos that's literally left tens of thousands of Canadians dead. But how did we get here? And who's to blame? Watch and this is Mr. Gunn's own words here, watch the YouTube-censored documentary, Canada is Dying, now available on Twitter. But that's interesting. There's some questions here. One of the other people who was involved with the film, he tweeted this out. Incredible to see the success of Canada is Dying on Twitter. It really is a testament to Elon Musk's commitment to freedom of speech. When our documentary was censored by YouTube, oh, I'm having troubles tonight. When our documentary was censored by YouTube via age restriction, wasn't removed from the platform. It was age restriction. We knew we had to move the film to a platform free of censorship. Canada will not be bullied by big tech and big government working together to hide the truth. This issue is too important to be silenced and censored. Please share the documentary widely in our circles. Getting this message out is life or death. For many Canadians living with addiction, they need to know there is hope. This is a film that has people being assaulted. Shows people using drugs. It has graphic language. It has graphic descriptions of a variety of different situations. And the censorship that it received was that it was put age restriction, which is to say you have to be a certain age to watch people being assaulted, people using drugs, graphic language, graphic descriptions. That's YouTube saying, hey, maybe this isn't necessarily appropriate for kids. Now, one would hypothesize that if we have groups of people that are deeply concerned, they're worried about the kids, we got to protect our kids, we got to make sure kids aren't being exposed to content that is not appropriate for them or their age. The little minds can't handle it. One would think that would be a consistent message. One would think that we wouldn't see, rampant hypocrisy like we see from, oh, look, that keynote speaker from the protest that talked about leaving our kids alone. Here's Mr. David Parker. They censored this on YouTube and throttled it on Facebook. Time to watch it here, folks. So let's just be super clear. By the film's own creators, the censorship that happened was that YouTube took a look at the content, as YouTube does. There's a reason why we don't use a lot of profanity on the show, if any, and it has to do with the fact that if you drop too many of the words, then the YouTube machine goes, yeah, that's not appropriate for kids. And that's okay, because when you have a kid who's scrolling YouTube, I can't imagine any kids getting this far into the show because it would be so very boring for them. But when you have kids going through YouTube, you don't want them necessarily to be exposed to content that should be more age appropriate. And as I said earlier, the first couple of minutes of the film have somebody being hit in the head with an incendiary device. It's understandable to say that kind of violence, maybe it's not age appropriate, but it's pretty telling that the same people who are standing up in front of crowds of people, who are targeting the supports that exist for LGBTQ2S plus kids, those same people are willing to totally ignore the fact that this film's censorship was only to prevent it from getting in front of kids. You want to go watch it on YouTube? You can still go watch it on YouTube. You can watch it on any of the platforms that it's available on. You just have to confirm that it's your age. It would seem, using the logic that we're seeing from Danielle Smith and David Parker, and there's no shortage of other high visibility, high profile conservatives who have said, this film was censored, it should be available to everyone. I guess we should be making cigarettes and liquor available to kids too, by that logic. We shouldn't. There's a big difference between having conversations in schools where you're talking about the reality that is the spectrum of human sexuality and human gender, and exposing kids to graphic violence, graphic language, and graphic situations. There's a big difference between those two things. But the fact that here we have David Parker saying, oh, this film was censored, that's unacceptable. Censorship's super bad. People should be able to say whatever they want, whenever they want, with any sort of problems. There shouldn't be any censorship on this. It gets pretty clear pretty quick that this isn't about protecting the kids. This is about enforcing an ideology at all costs. That's it. Got a couple of other things we want to talk about real quick because we had a busy little week in Foypland. So one of the things that we try to do every once in a while is when we know that people in positions of government are lying to us, say about essays or awarding mass contracts or we file a Freedom of Information Act request. And I want to be really clear, and we've said this on the show before, filing a Freedom of Information Act request is not exclusive to anybody. Literally anybody can go with their email address. You can sign up once you're verified as who you are within the government systems, which everybody had to do to get the kiddie payments that Danielle Smith paid up for everybody and the seniors payments. You just sign in with that, and then you can file a Freedom of Information request about any government activity that you want to. You can also file Freedom of Information Act requests with pretty much any public organization. It's a great little program. So it's a thing to do. If you're curious, it's a great way to get questions. We had some questions this week. And we wanted to see. So we filed us a couple of Freedom of Information Act requests. We wanted to share what those are. And we will absolutely, once we get those results in, I'm assuming 6 months, we'll share them. Because we asked for any records of any conversations that had to do with the blocking of Danielle Smith's Facebook account that happened inside of government. I mean, Danielle Smith presented it as this is the account that I use to communicate with 4.2 million Albertans. How dare they censor it? Well, they didn't. They just made sure that one of the accounts that was running the Premier of Alberta's accounts that apparently triggered a spam filter was real, so that people didn't get misinformation other than the normal misinformation that they get from Danielle Smith. So we asked for that. It'd be interesting to see what we get. We also asked, because we wanted to resolve the question, Danielle Smith, she uses her Twitter accounts for a lot of official stuff. We wanted to see, hey, she keeps saying that she hasn't blocked that many people. So we asked to know how many Twitter accounts Danielle Smith has blocked with her Premier of Alberta Twitter account. And then we also asked for any records that had to do with any sort of discussions around the sale of her restaurant. Now, in the past, our FOIP requests have been a little bit hit and miss, but we did get a little bit of help from a few folks this time around who said, hey, here's how you want to phrase the things in order to try to get the things that you want. Because there's a lot of people who know the things who are working on other things now, but you still want to make sure that the government is to some degree held accountable. And it's going to be really, really interesting because to our eyes, one of two things is going to happen. They're going to say, yeah, Danielle Smith has 1.2 million, I'm making that number up, Twitter accounts blocked. Or they're going to say the Twitter account of Danielle Smith is a personal account and the government of Alberta isn't responsible for it. That would be fascinating because that would nullify her argument when regards to the conversations around the blocking of her Facebook. They're either going to provide us some records saying, oh yeah, these are the conversations that happened around what happened when her Facebook account was blocked. And assuming that there's any government employees who are responsible for running that Facebook account, we'll get those records. Now, obviously, there won't be any personal information in there because you never get that. But there should be records if there are government employees who are managing the Premier of Alberta's Facebook account. Or they're going to say, it's a private Facebook account. in which case it's a private Facebook account. And then that really begs the question, why does a private Facebook account that isn't the Premier of Alberta's official Facebook account have 5 people running it, one of whom apparently runs 300 other accounts? We're looking to have some fun. Anyways, that is the end of our regular program. I want to say before I open it up to the floor, if there's anybody on the Twitter Spaces who wants to share some thoughts, we'd absolutely love to hear from you tonight. But I want to really highlight that in regards to the FOIP requests that we filed, we're only able to file those FOIP requests because of the support that we get from our Patreon sponsors. It's a wonderful little thing that you can do if you like the kind of content that we're producing here. If you'd like to see us produce more of that content, then you can sign up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce the kind of content that we do. So there's the plug in there, nice and early. Excuse me. But yeah, it really is because of the support that we get from our Patreon sponsors. You get access to the early interviews that we do, but we never ever will paywall any content, because one of the big things that we're committed to here at the show is making sure that we're having conversations. We're starting conversations, even if those conversations are uncomfortable, even if those conversations are complicated. That's one of the reasons why we had Jeremy Farkas on, and that we've gotten a lot of really, really great feedback on that one. If you liked the Jeremy Farkas episode, before I see we have a speaker, before I open it up to the floor, I just want to plug the episode that we have coming up this week, because boy, did it take some turns that I wasn't expecting. We're going to be presenting a conversation that'll be going up for our Patreon sponsors, hopefully tomorrow, Tuesday morning at the latest. And that'll be going live on Wednesday night for everybody else. And that's a conversation with an individual named Colin May. Colin is a ridiculously credentialed, ridiculously educated person who was, for a period of time, the chair of the Human Rights Commission of Alberta. He was, only a couple of months later, ostensibly fired by Tyler Shandro. Now, there was a very public narrative that existed as to why that firing occurred, but there's also a lot of stuff that was going on in the background that wasn't talked about. Colin's taken some time to sort through all of that. He's launched some legal actions, and he was good enough to come on the show and share his side of the story, which gets to be a pretty intense little conversation at points. So we're going to be dropping that for, like I said, our Patreon sponsors, hopefully tomorrow. And it will be our Wednesday episode at 8 o'clock. It is to say that there are some bombshells that are going to make some heads explode, and probably we'll get some DMs. Is definitely an understatement. But at this point, we do have somebody who is lined up in the Twitter Spaces who would like to say some words. And so I want to bring Cassandra in. And again, if you have anything that you want to share, if there's anything that I said that you have a problem with, love to hear it. The big ask is that you just be respectful, no profanity. Well, you can have a little bit of profanity, but nothing like, don't drop like an Eminem verse or anything like that. Cassandra, what's going on tonight?
Okay, well, I just wanted to highlight something because this keeps coming up about the connection of NDP provincial parties versus the NDP federal party. Okay. And there's something, anybody can look this up. You can go to ndp.ca, and if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you'll find Constitution, and you can look at the federal party's Constitution. And I'm not really good with, I'm pretty sure the Roman numerals are Article 12, which is provincial parties. And it says every province of Canada should have a fully autonomous provincial party, providing its constitution and principles are not in conflict with the federal party. And if you can read it and see, but if you read it, a lot of the things they attribute to the connection between the provincial and federal party actually aren't true. It actually, a lot of it's about, just how the parties are structured, and, having different membership committees, like for people with disabilities, and and youth, and so forth and so on, that kind of thing. And it just and labor, and it explains the connections with labor and farm groups and stuff like that in it. And that's really mostly what it's about. But as for individual provincial parties, when it comes to governing when it comes to, their provincial issues, including economic issues, they have to do what's in the best interest of their own province. So that's why they're fully autonomous, and they're not. And I don't know if I'm articulating that perfectly, but that's why. And so if anybody is confused and think, oh well, the federal party dictates to the provincial parties what happens, that's not true. They are autonomous, and there's only very minimal circumstances where the federal party could intervene. And you can read it, as I said, ndp.ca, scroll to the bottom of the page, look for Constitution, and you can read it for yourself and determine. And I just wanted to read, it was brought up the last time. I'm a little bit not feeling so good today, and there is a lot I'd like to say, but I'm going to leave it at this. Just due to some of our conversations. Well, I'm not going to leave it. I have a couple things to say. So this, and even though German was one of my first languages, I'm really terrible at pronouncing German words. But it was a German pastor, and he wrote the first they came.
Yeah.
First they came for the communists. I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. I'm stuttering. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And I think we're in a time where we really need to think about those words, and we can insert a number of communities into that poem. And we really need to think about that. We can say it's horrifying, and we can say this is terrible, but what are we going to do about it?
Well, that's the big
How
question.
Are we going to speak out?
And that's where I think that Mr. Parker has sort of given away the instruction manual to some degree. He's made it very clear he wants to see people who are ideologically aligned with his worldview running for positions in the school boards, running for positions in city councils. He wants to see people getting more and more involved so that this agenda that they have can be promoted, and so that the people whom they disagree with can be suppressed. And I think that the only way to address that and to deal with that is A, to get people aware what's going on and what the stakes are, and then B, people got to start running for these stuff and supporting actively candidates who they align with.
Well, and
that's the ballgame.
One of the reasons, like when we had the last municipal election here in Calgary, one of the reasons we ended up electing not just a progressive mayor, but a bunch of new progressive councillors. And it's because people were actively made a point of finding out who each individual was, and if they aligned with certain values, and people got out. But you're right, we've got to fight back, and to David Parker. And the other thing I wanted to say, the irony that I find, I really find in what he was saying, don't let anybody tell you you're a disease. Anybody that tells you you're a disease is anti-human. But isn't he just calling himself anti-human, because he's saying LGBTQ S plus kids are a disease. So doesn't that make him anti-human?
I mean,
And
as we pointed out with his promotion of the
yeah,
censored nature of the documentary, Mr. Parker does not seem to be any stranger to hypocrisy.
oh no, not at all. Like, I mean, but that's what it is. I mean, there was the thing. I believe, I'm pretty sure it was a long time ago. I know it's been used in other countries and under other circumstances with dictatorial types, but I'm pretty sure it was something, if memory serves me correct, that Hitler had actually said in Mein Kampf, and he said, "What is true of us, we say of them." So if it's true of you, you say that it's true of them, and that's like from the dictatorial, the dictator and authoritarian fascists handbook, is that if it's true of you, you accuse others, you accuse everybody else of it to detract attention away from you. So, it comes to light a video that was released on Twitter of Christine Anderson. I mean, anybody that knows anything about this woman, she is a Nazi. She doesn't. The party is not called the Nazi party that she's with, but she is a Nazi in so many ways. But she was sitting there talking about as if, you know, that she was calling other people Nazis, basically, and saying that, you know, she we were, that somehow she's fighting against this when she actually embodies it. And it's a tactic right out of the, like I said, the fascist dictator's handbook. That's what you do. And I think it's a way to confuse people, um, especially people that aren't maybe always paying attention as much to the political realm or things that are going on, because they're too busy with, sometimes it's just they're too busy with life and work, and it serves to people that aren't as informed to confuse them, because they, to try to, that's how they do it. And I think it's just something that people need to be aware of.
Totally agree with you. Totally agree with you.
And I'm done.
All right. Well, thanks for tapping in, Cassandra. And with that, we've got Lynn, who is waiting in the queues. And I got to give full credit to Lynn. She gives us a heads up on a boatload of things, and that's really, really appreciated. So, Lynn, what's going on up north today?
Well, I know I told you I was going to keep my mouth shut from now on, but
I'm glad you're not.
so yeah, I know this is all scary and really, causes a lot of anger because we just sit here and listen to you or other podcasts or whatever. But like I said in the chat, we have to keep in mind that 85% of us are against this crap.
Yep.
So we need to start doing something. And email your school boards. I did that today. I'm not a Catholic school board supporter, but I emailed my public board, which has a lot more board members than they do, because I know there's going to be a lot of people out tomorrow night, based on what I'm hearing from some of the teachers. And I don't go out because of my husband's health, but there's stuff you can do from home. There's things you can speak out about. Mr. Higdon, in his make-believe world, thinks that the Catholic school board has no gay employees. It's just mind-blowing to me. And, thankfully, Pride got their act together. I'm a Christian. I have issues with some things too, but my bottom line is what other people do is none of my business. And I'm here to support the kids. And what he's doing is not helping the kids. I know kids who are in trouble. I hear it from my grandkids who think this is normal. We need to understand that. And we need to support these kids, because if the UCP thinks the suicide rates are high right now, wait.
Yeah.
because I talked to a couple of teachers last week, and their Pride Week last week was so downplayed, they were embarrassed.
Yeah.
So we just need to start speaking up, guys, and do what you can, whether it's from your keyboard or calling, I'll be calling Brian Jean tomorrow. Things like that. We have to keep doing it, because if we just sit back and listen and get angry at this, they're going to win.
Yep. No, we have to get involved. There's no question. And this is, I mean, I love the fact that you highlighted the fact that there are things that you can do from home, because I know that there are a lot of people who feel like they're not doing the things. They're not running themselves. They're not door knocking because they can't. And the reality is, if you take a look at some of the things that happened during this election, there were candidates who stepped down or stepped away. I'll use the woman from Lethbridge West as an example. After she had published a video that nobody had seen, I mean, I think the views on that were like 200. After she published that video and just let it sit there, where she was saying how teachers are showing kindergarten kids pornographic materials, it's patently false. And because of the uproar that occurred when that video was amplified, she ended up stepping away. And there's no shortage of examples where making sure that you're having the conversations with people, whether it's in person or on social media, as long as you're not a jerk about it, that moves the needle. And so if you're not somebody who has the wherewithal to run for public office, big or small, I mean, you take a look at most school board races, and they're not really hotly contested. And especially when we're talking about rural Alberta, where a lot of these kids are, I'll say, extra vulnerable just by nature of the limited supports available to them. Choosing to put your name forward, or choosing to support somebody who is able to put their name forward, who's going to have the wherewithal to say, yeah, no, not on my watch, that's absolutely something. Getting people to talking to people about candidates that you believe in, that have said, you know what, this hate speech is garbage, and I'm not going to tolerate it. And if somebody wants to write me angry emails, they can write me angry emails. I don't care.
Well, and I think that's the thing we forget about, because we've been so lax, I guess. Last week, I was talking to a neighbor who goes to church with Brian Jean. And I said to her, she said to me, Lynn, I'm really worried about what's going on. And I'm like, yeah, you should be. I said, do you know who the first person that signed the Take Back Alberta bus was? She's like, no. And I said, Brian Jean.
We got a picture of his signature here.
Yeah. So, she was shocked, and I know she voted for him, but we need to just little things like that. I didn't have a huge argument with her. We just had a little discussion, and I left it at that.
And that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
That's totally the way to do it, because, and this goes back to what I was talking about last week, where I was talking about the problem that progressives, and I'm air quoting that for everybody who's just listening, run into over and over and over again, is that because there is an appreciation of the real world stakes. I mean, I'll go back to the post that came out of the Pride YMM, 44% of 2S LGBTQIA plus kids report having thoughts about suicide. 50% report self-harming. 53% feel unsafe at school. 64% hear homophobic comments. Like that's real stats. That's real stuff. And once people become more aware of what the real repercussions are, they tend to do better. But if you're approaching things from a place where you already know those things, it's really easy to get passionate about it. But if we say to somebody who doesn't know those things, how do you not know this? How can you possibly support Brian Jean? He's not speaking out against this stuff. Like, are you a monster? That's the route that too many of these conversations take. And we have to be willing to say, like, I heard from people who were in Jennifer Johnston's constituency that they had no idea about the comments that she made about trans kids. And So the problem there isn't that 72% or 73% or whatever it was of people, it's in the 70s, voted for Jennifer Johnson. That's not the problem there. And to look at that 70 whatever percent and go, all of those people hate trans kids, that is a disingenuous, misleading argument, because when you start to actually look into how many of those people were aware of those comments, there's a stunning number of people who were like, oh my God, I had no idea. And so
Yeah.
having those conversations in a way that people can hear them is critically, critically important.
And I think it's really important to point out that I was told by someone that the Catholic School Board meetings are normally held at district office. So they know how many people they're going to get because it's now at the biggest high school.
See, but there you go. That's the whole thing right there. Is that speaks to the level of engagement. And I would also argue,
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if you support the Catholic board, the public board, whatever. If you're in Fort McMurray, you can call the Catholic board tomorrow and complain about this.
Yep.
Anyway, that's all I have to say tonight, Nate.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn, and I'm glad that you're still being vocal.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, looks like Tammy is looking to weigh in, so we'll bring Tammy in, and then if anybody else wants to weigh in, there's people in the spaces. You can just hop right in. But Tammy, what's going on tonight? I think you might be muted, Tammy.
Thank you about that. Didn't know if I hadn't hit the unmute.
I do that all the time. The number of times that I'll like start the show and I'll get a message from someone being like, "There's no audio on the Twitter Spaces." I'll be like, "Ah, damn it, the little microphone." So I feel you.
So I was listening to what Lynn was talking about, and I agree with everything she said, but the amount of cognitive dissonance that goes on with some Albertans. I know I've spoken about this fellow that I know from back where our farm was before our fire, and he's been taking care of the land that's there. And I've tried to engage with him to kind of figure out, because he comes across as an absolutely, and I'm not saying this in a mean way, but in a very typical way for that area, he comes across as a very typical redneck Albertan with the really most horrible beliefs from the area that makes me just cringe. But then, so he'll do things like he'll post these things that are particularly anti-LGBTQS plus, and I'm like, I like, it's like, I know we've had to make the agreement not to talk about it to each other because we get into these rile, and he's like, no, I can't. And sometimes I think it's because I'm hitting a nerve, and it's just a nerve that he's not willing to touch. Because it's not, when I say it's an argument, it's not like a screaming argument. It's like a discussion where I try to make him see things. Because I know he's smart, right? He's not a dumb guy. But it's like, as soon as it hits that dissident part, he's just unwilling to engage on it, right? As soon as I start making, it feels like as soon as I start making traction where he's starting to get what I'm trying to get to him, he moves away. He says, no, I'm gonna have to agree to disagree on this. I can't do that. Well, and one of the things that I've run into with him, there are things where he should be like really, and I've heard him say things that are really positive for the LGBTQ Sorry, I can't do the alphabet soup sometimes. Sorry,
That-
stroke.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you're dealing with the residual effects of a stroke. So before anybody gets all uppity, there's some stuff going on here for Tammy. So, yeah, we understand what you're saying, Tammy.
Okay, so, but and yet then he'll go like I'm post like a man and a woman and this and that, and I'm like, that doesn't need, like, it's like he doesn't get that doesn't need support. We all get that, those of us who straight, it's kind of like the people that go blue lives matter when they hear black lives matter. It's like blue light, it doesn't, that part doesn't matter. Do you get that cops are trained and paid and have unions to protect them, where the black people that get attacked don't have that support, except for the people that support the black and, the black people and the people of color? Like, that's why Black Lives Matter. But it's the same thing. It's like he comes across, when we're having a discussion, as positively, a bit positive, like, at least not negative about LGBTQS plus people. There, I got it out. But yet publicly he's got to do the thing.
Well, that kind of gets into the whole toxic masculinity bullshit. Like, I know that there are a lot of people who, I remember back in the 90s.
I'm old enough that's not offensive. Trust
Okay,
me.
thank
It's all
you.
good.
But I remember back in the 90s, like when I would be out, there was a gentleman that I worked with who was like one of the leading drag queens in Canada. Like, he had awards and stuff. And
Yeah.
there would be people who would be like, "How are you comfortable hanging around with somebody like that?" Other guys who knew that,
Yeah.
I'm friends with them. And there would be people who are, "How are you comfortable hanging around with someone like that?" And I was like, "Why wouldn't I be?" Like, what's the, and I think that so much of it comes back to, especially when you're talking about the men who get super loud about this stuff. I think that there's a lot of that toxic masculinity. I think there's a lot of that insecurity, and I'm probably getting in a little trouble for saying this, but at the end of the day, I think it comes back to, there was I keep saying this and I can't find the right. I need to attribute it properly because it's not my idea and I don't want to be seen as taking credit for it. But when there's a great little presentation where there's a presenter who talks about the fact that the reason why so many men are so afraid and so vitriolic towards anybody who's not a straight man is because they're afraid that that gay person is going to treat them the way that they, as a straight person, normally treat women. They're afraid that they're going to have all of the assumptions that come with that be projected on them. And
Right.
that to me is not only incredibly insightful, but I think it is the start of a much larger conversation around maybe there's some things that we need to address and deal with because we got some problems here.
I would agree with that because, okay, I'm going to tell a story that my mom loved to tell and has told all my kids before she passed away, sadly. So back in the day in Alberta, she was one of the first female bar girls, bartenders. She would serve bar to the guys or serve beer to the guys. And it was at the Saxony in Edmonton. And there used to be, on certain nights, there was a table at the back that all the gay guys would come and take up this table. They'd all come and sit. And the girls would serve these gay guys, and the gay guys were awesome. My mom loved every one of them. And not just because of them, because they were friendly and they were nice and they were respectful. And what they would do is, as they bought their rounds, the change from the guys from the rounds would go in the middle of the table. Well, my dad was a really good looking dude. Think Johnny Cash, except better looking.
Better
Black
looking than Johnny
hair.
Cash.
Yeah, black hair, blue eyes. And these guys that worked that had their table that mom would work, loved my dad. And they'd call dad over when he was there, and because they knew he was Jeannie's boy. So they'd call him over, and my dad was cool with it. You know, if they wanted to sit there and ply him with beer and buy him beers, he was totally fine with that. And he'd sit and he'd chat with them and talk with them. And it never bothered him. But the other guys in the bar would they would take offense. And they pulled my mom aside one day and said to her, I don't understand how you can, basically serve those guys over there. And mom looked down and went, really? It's really easy, guys. She said, they tip better than you, and they don't try to pinch my ass when I walk away.
There you go. That's what I'm saying right there.
And my dad laughed. My dad was there, and he laughed like, my mom used to say, or my dad used to say, don't challenge Jeannie. She'll take you down. Like, when my mom would get mad about things, dad would walk to the other side of the street and walk because he knew my mom didn't need defending, and he knew he didn't want to be in the middle of mom taking somebody down. So
that's an awesome story. Thank you so much for sharing that, Tammy.
All right. You have a great night.
All right. You as well. And with that, I think that we are through our list of speakers for the evening. I'm going to give one more opportunity for anybody who wants to share any thoughts to tag in. Otherwise, I'm going to do one more quick Patreon plug. www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. Thanks. And other than that, it doesn't look like anybody wants to tag in tonight. That's cool. So I want to say a big thank you to our chat, which was super active tonight. I want to say a big thank you to all of the thoughts that were shared in there. I love seeing the chat. It's my favorite thing to do after a show is to go through all the chat messages that I couldn't catch and see the activity in there. So if you're not somebody who's comfortable speaking out loud, then by all means, feel free to weigh in on the chat. It is moderated. We do have a moderator that's not me that actually can pay attention to it. And if you get out of line, then they will issue you a warning and then consequences. So be cool. That's all we ask. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who spoke tonight. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who's listening in on the Twitter Spaces or watching this live on one of the many platforms that we stream to. And if any of this episode ends up being age restricted, we're okay with that because sometimes we talk about grown-up things, and that means that kids shouldn't necessarily just be randomly exposed to it because of the whimsy of an algorithm. We certainly aren't going to post a social media campaign about how sad we are that the grown-up stuff that we talked about is being made available only to grown-ups because, I don't know, we try to be responsible or something. All of that being said, like I said, the conversation that we had with Colin is coming up. That'll be our live broadcast on Wednesday. And we will be back again next Sunday with another live episode. I honestly thought, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's like a Politico. And we were having a whole conversation about how, you know what, if I was the mastermind behind the Danielle Smith show right now, I would be saying we're gonna run silent and deep for a while here. We're going to have the most boring first chunk of months that's ever been seen in Alberta politics, so that we can kind of change the channel a little bit and maybe get some stuff done. There's no shortage of activities for Danielle Smith to go to. We saw that she attended a couple of events just over the last couple of days. There should be plenty to keep her busy. Plus, part of the province is still on fire and stuff. So there's, the theory was maybe the drama from the UCP will be limited. It appears that is decidedly not going to be the case. So we'll undoubtedly have a whole lot to talk about next Sunday But again, a big thank you to everybody for listening. If you're listening to the podcast version of this after the fact, then we'd love it if you left a rating and a review, because every once in a while, the folks that we do such a good job of making a little angry, they leave ratings and reviews, and we need the good ones to kind of countermand it, because we're told it does make a difference in getting the podcast in front of more people. So go to your favorite podcast app. And I also want to say there's a few folks, since we transitioned back to being a fully independent, production. We were partnered with another organization a little while ago. We wanted to see how it would go. It didn't go so great, so we unpartnered with them. There's a few folks who've had some issues resubscribing. If you are, just send us a DM. We'll send you the appropriate link that you can. We tried to fix most of it, but apparently some of the other apps that are not the major ones, apparently there's still some glitches. So send us a DM. We'll make sure that we send you the current link that you can subscribe to. Our entire back catalog is still available. We didn't lose any content, thank goodness. So hooray for that. But all of that being said, I just want to reiterate, the people who want to go after LGBTQ2S+ youth, the people who want to remove supports for marginalized folks of any kind, they are showing up and they're being loud. And the only way to combat that is if you find the ways that you can show up too, whether it's showing up yourself and running for stuff, whether or not it's supporting candidates that you can get behind, whether it's just trying to educate people through conversations and through amplifying and sharing social media posts that are actually grounded in reality. Those are all things that we need to be doing, because right now there's a group of people that have had 3 years of COVID and 3 years of protesting COVID and health measures, who have gotten incredibly organized and incredibly efficient, and they are incredibly insidious. And the only way to beat that is if we show up too. So show up. And if you want to show up next Sunday, wear the next live show, that'll be cool too. All that being said, everybody, take care of yourselves. Make sure that you're taking time to recharge your batteries. I got to do that yesterday. I went out to the rural Alberta areas and found some old sea trains. It was super awesome. But you got to do that stuff. You got to take care of yourself. So take care of yourselves. And as always, keep the conversation going.